time.
Yeah. So hi everybody, and thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Matthew, and I'd like to welcome you all to the first in Climate Case Ireland's winter webinar series. I'm joined by my colleagues here, Clodagh Daly, Emer Slattery, and Helena Murphy, who will be helping to facilitate the discussion. Over the next 4 weeks, we'll be hosting a range of discussions all around the subject of climate justice. So make sure you keep an eye on our social media to stay up to date with what's going on. Today, we have a brilliant lineup of speakers who will be discussing climate litigation around the globe, from Norway to Brazil. I'm going to pass you over to Helena now in just a minute, and she can tell you a little bit more about them. But just in the meantime, if you have any questions you want to ask, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and add your question to the Q&A box down the bottom of the screen. If you see someone who has a similar question to you, make sure you upvote it, and we're going to ask the most popular questions at the end. So I'm just going to pass you over to my colleague Helena now, who's going to begin the discussion.
Thanks, Matthew. And again, another big warm welcome to our fantastic speakers. It's really we're really grateful for you taking your time from your busy schedule to talk about climate litigation across the globe, and so that's really appreciative of that. So we have Andreas Randoy, who's with Nature and Youth Norway, Richard Harvey, legal counsel for Greenpeace, and Alessandra Lehman, who's a climate lawyer and an academic. So each of the speakers will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll give people the opportunity at the end as well to ask questions, or they can ask questions during the speakers while they talk, and we'll address them, try to address some of them at the end. So I suppose just quick before we launch into that, just to remind people, I suppose, just to what climate case is, what it's about. It's basically it was the first climate case which was taken in Ireland. In June 2000, just of this year, it came before the Supreme Court, which is obviously the highest court in the land, and we took the Irish government essentially to court for failing to adequately take action on climate and climate mitigation, and basically that its national mitigation plan was just deemed to be insufficient for the purpose of reducing our emissions, which are per capita fairly high. So yeah, the Supreme Court found in our favour, and it is it's one of the few climate cases which have reached the Supreme Court, which has been decided upon by the Supreme Court and found in favour of the litigants. But of course, that could very well change given the growth of climate and environmental litigation in courts across the globe. So as we're going to hear now just very shortly, there was a case recently heard in Norway for the Norwegian Supreme Court, and also there's also some interesting climate litigation developments in Brazil. So without further ado, I'll just introduce our first speaker, Andreas Randoy. He's the Deputy Head of Nature and Youth Norway. He's also, so that's one of the organizations which took that Norwegian climate case called People versus Arctic Oil, and that was just recently heard for the Supreme Court, so at the Norwegian Supreme Court. And in addition to his activist role in that case, he's also deputy head of the Nature and Youth, and he writes for Norwegian environmental magazine Pan. So Andreas, I believe you have a presentation for us on the case. If you'd like to go ahead and share that with us, and then get us up to speed on the Norwegian climate case, which was heard just very recently. If you'd like to get ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to come and speak to other people and other organizations doing the same as us, and using the court system to fight climate change. So that's I really enjoy that. Hope you can see this presentation all right. So I'm going to talk to you about the Arctic climate lawsuit against oil in the Arctic, in the very north of Norway. My name is Andreas Randoy, and as Helena said, I'm deputy head of Nature and Youth. We are also part of we're the youth organization of Friends of the Earth Norway, so we're also known as Young Friends of the Earth Norway. And I'm going to start to tell you a little bit about us. So we are the largest youth environmental organization in Norway. We have about 9,000 members, and they are spread out in local chapters all across Norway. So these local chapters, they will be like a small group of maybe 10 people, 10, 15, 20 people, often around 17 years, and they'll work on environmental cases where they are. So they'll work against a new road that's being built, or working to promote better bus coverage, or lower fare prices, or better cycling conditions. And then we also work nationally on cases that are really important. Then the work against Norwegian oil, and that's something that we've worked on from the very beginning. So we're 53 years old, our organization, and from the very beginning, Norwegian oil has been one of the key issues we worked on. So this photo is from a place called Lofoten, or the Lofoten Islands. It's a really beautiful place. We often have our summer camp there. So this picture is taken from our summer camp in Lofoten. And Lofoten is one of the very few places where the Norwegian oil industry hasn't been able to get in. It's a place with a unique ecosystem. It's because of the combination of the shallow water and the midnight sun. You know, because it's very far north. In summer, it's sun all night, and that creates a really special ecosystem. So there's a huge fishing industry there, and for over 20 years, Nature and Youth have fought to keep this area oil-free, and that's actually a fight that we've won. So I think it's really inspiring to know that when we're fighting Arctic oil, where I mean, they've come a long way. Unless we win this case, we've very likely lost. But it's important to have in mind that we can win against the oil industry. So the way we work our campaigns in Nature and Youth, we do a lot of demonstrations. This is a demonstration against the dumping of mining waste in fjords that we also work with. And sometimes we might even do some illegal actions. This is from a civil disobedient action against mining waste dumping in fjords. And I think it's a really beautiful picture. But we also work politically. We try to meet politicians, tell them what we think. This is from an action on the Christian Party in Norway. They hadn't really decided how far north the oil industry should be able to get, and they were sort of a key player. So we made them a really nice cake, and we put some pictures of some of the thousands of unique species that are only found in this area known as the marginal ice zone in the Arctic. Put some of them on the cake and gave them some cake. So that's also how we work. So that's a little bit about us. But now back to the oil industry. What you see here is a map of the Norwegian continental shelf, of all the little colored spaces. That's where oil licenses have been given. So as you see, it's pretty much all over. Pretty much everywhere the oil industry wants to go, it can go. Now, the one exception, you will see that sort of in the middle, that's Lofoten. So that's the place we've managed to win. But then this case is, of course, about the north. So if we zoom in, you see that these licenses, the ones in the very north, they are the one we are suing and trying to stop. And briefly told, Richard will go into more detail, I think. But our argument is that in the middle of a climate crisis, it doesn't make sense to look for more oil further north than ever before. And we do this using the Norwegian Constitution, Article 112, and I have a translation here for you. And really the most important thing from our constitution, our environmental constitution, is the first sentence: every person has the right to an environment that is conducive to health and to a natural environment whose productivity and diversity are maintained. Now, we believe that that means that we have a right, and there are certain things that the government simply cannot do that would breach that right. We read it as it stands. Now, the Norwegian government does not read this paragraph as that. They say that this is not talk about a right as in how we typically think about rights, but rather that the government needs to sort of have some sort of environmental policy. And then also what happened in 2014, 2 years before these oil licenses were given out, they actually updated the constitution. So the Norwegian parliament, by a huge majority, they updated this law, and they added the last sentence: the authorities of the state shall take measures for the implementation of these principles. Now, we firmly read that as a strengthening of this law. It goes from saying that you can't do the really bad stuff to you actually have to do stuff to make sure that the environment is safe. And it's very clear that they did this because they saw that we needed a strengthening of environmental rights. So that's the law we're using, and our arguments are very simple in some way. The world is getting warmer. We're not seeing a world, we're not living in a world that's really gotten the climate problem under control. Quite the contrary, if we don't stop now, the world will get way too warm. And the UN climate panel, the newest report says that we have to ensure maximum 1.5 degrees of warming. So we argue that more than 1.5 degrees warming, that will be a breach of our environmental rights. And that's really where we're headed. And at the same time, what you see in the graph here is that if we add up all of the coal, gas, and oil that's been found and planned to dig up, if we add all of that, the CO2 from that, then the world doesn't meet even the 2-degree goal. Even if all coal stays in the ground, and a lot of Norwegian politicians, they like to talk about how gas can help phase out coal. Well, if we only take up the oil and gas, we will still not reach the actual climate target. But even though this is the case, in 2016, the Norwegian government opened up a completely new area for Arctic oil drilling for the first time in 20 years. And this was further north and east than ever before. And it was also all of the environmental institutions that give advice to the Norwegian government, they told them not to do this. But they did it anyway. Now, when we look at, sorry for the Norwegian in this graph, I'll tell you what it is. So the first thing is the total emissions of Norway. We have about 50 million tons of CO2 every year. Now that's quite a lot. We're not a big population. It's way more than we should. And the biggest cause of these pollutions, that's Norwegian oil and gas production. That's about 1/5 of all our emissions. But that's only the emissions from producing Norwegian oil and gas. If we add up all of the emissions from the oil and gas that we dig up and sell to other countries, that makes it 500 million tons of CO2. So we export 10 times more CO2 than we emit ourselves. So we think that it's quite unfair to talk about Norway's emission being only 50 million tons when our real contribution is I mean, so much bigger. You can cut all Norwegian emissions and it would be only a fraction. So we say that, I mean, and the government in court is they go a very long way about talking about all of the great things Norway do for the climate, all the electric cars and contributing to rainforest protection and stuff. But it really doesn't matter when you compare it to the oil. And in addition to this, of course, we have the natural environment. This is a particularly vulnerable and important area, and we're getting new reports all the time that tell us that this is a really important area. And I mean, Norway has a big fishing industry, and that's a sustainable industry that we can live off from all of eternity if we manage it sustainably. But we actually risk losing that resource by drilling for oil in the Arctic. So therefore, we're taking the government to court. We did that in 2017. That was right when I got into the central board of Nature and Youth and started working on the climate case. So it's been really exciting to follow this case from the first, the second to now the third round. Supreme Court was really special. We got to tell our case and we got to talk about how members of Nature and Youth really fear for our future. We have members that last summer, it was so warm, they had to shoot the farm animals on their farms because they couldn't feed them. Or members in Svalbard, on the island very far north from Norway, where there was where there's been a lot of damage and people have died actually because of climate change. And I'm really glad we got to present that to the court. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, how does a Supreme Court hearing look like in Corona times? Well, so I have a picture for you, and it looks like this. So we sat in one room and presented our case. That's our lawyer, Advokat Feinberg, and all the judges sat in their offices. But and we were a bit, I was wondering how this would go, but I thought it went well. Yeah, so that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic, Andreas. Really provided such a good overview of the campaign surrounding the case, and yeah, it gives us a sense of how it was conducted as well, and so thanks so much. I'm sure there'll be some interesting questions at the end. So I'll just move on. I believe we're going to speak with Alessandra now.
Okay.
So it's Alessandra Lehman. She's a climate lawyer in Brazil. She's a partner in a law firm in Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil. And she's also a graduate of Stanford Law School, and she holds a PhD in international law. And she also, in addition to these commitments, she's also a vice president of the Brazilian Bar Association for their environmental chapter. So we're delighted to have her also speak to us, and she will talk about, give us a sense of what the climate litigation landscape is like in Brazil, particularly with new possible new litigation coming up there as well also. So Alessandra, I'll let you address our virtual audience.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm going to time myself just in case. And again, thanks for having me, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Brazil. Also, I would like to thank Andreas for the excellent insights. I was really interested in knowing more about the Norwegian case, especially now that I think the subject of Arctic drilling is going to become a hot topic in the final days of the Trump administration. As just yesterday, he announced his intention to begin selling leases in the final days of his tenure. for oil drilling in Alaska. So I think we can anticipate a bit of a heated discussion in that sense across the pond too. And I wanted to start by commending everybody's work on both the Irish and the Norwegian cases, and extending my congratulations to the Climate Case Ireland and Friends of the Irish Environment for the big win on such a landmark case from which we can all draw very important lessons for climate cases across the board in all jurisdictions, regardless of the legal systems they belong to. So what I wanted to do today, I wanted to do two things, time allowing. I wanted first to speak a little bit about the Climate Fund case in Brazil, which is the first climate case to ever reach the Brazilian Supreme Court, and then therefore it's in itself lies its importance. And two, I wanted to very briefly outline what I perceive in my experience as a lawyer and a climate litigator, what I perceive to be trends for climate litigation cases in Brazil. So just to give you some context, as I said, the Climate Fund case, ADPF 708, was filed a bit short of 4 months ago, so it's very, very recent, and it was filed by 4 political parties, and it's basically a claim which deals with the underfunding of the climate fund. The Climate Fund was created a couple of years ago as an instrument of the Brazilian goals and obligations regarding climate change, but back in 2009. A report released by the Comptroller General back in August 21 shows that only 13% of climate resources were allocated to the funds in 2019, and also, which is also a worrying trend, also there's a tendency to reduce those funds even further in the current financial year of 2020. So this is basically very, in a nutshell, what the Climate Fund case deals with. Besides the fact that it was the very first directly very first case to deal directly with climate law to reach the Supreme Court, I think it also has other quite interesting features that I wanted to briefly discuss with you. So the very first thing I think is interesting is that in September, just a bit over a month ago, the Supreme Court held a public hearing to hear not only legal experts, but also scientific experts. So as a result, 66 experts were heard during the course of 2 days. And this, which I also think is very interesting, this happened at the initiative of the court itself, which recognized that the subject of climate change demands beyond purely legal expertise, interdisciplinary knowledge regarding scientific, social, environmental, and economic aspects. So I think this is actually encouraging for the climate community. This sends a strong signal in terms of what expertise is needed to adequately tackle the subject of climate change. So as for the outcomes of the case, what outcome or outcomes can we expect? The first and more obvious outcome, I would say, is an adequate solution for the case at hand, which aims basically at redirecting. I mean, redirecting funds for the fund as they were originally supposed to. So this, in addition to the great environmental tragedies such as forest fires in the Amazon, the Pantanal wetlands, and the Pampa in the southern region that we have been experiencing as of late, I think this reinforces the urgency that the case reaches an adequate solution. That is, the government actually seizes resource constraints to the climate budget. So in this regard, I think another interesting feature of the case is I think we can draw a comparison to the Irish case and draw very important lessons also from the Irish case, in the sense that we are no longer discussing policy at large, which would give the executive, which would of course give the executive branch more leeway. But we're discussing policy that has been translated into statute. So in that sense, we believe that the matter is clearly subject to judicial review, because this is a discussion that we do have in Brazil as well, in terms of the justiciability of public policy as a manifestation of the separation of powers doctrine. So I believe that since we are discussing policy that has been translated into hard law, that this is an obstacle, this is a hurdle, a procedural hurdle that I think the case is very likely to be able to overcome. So second thing I think is important for the fact that I personally feel very validated. I've been working with climate law since 2004, and this is the very first case, as I said, to reach the Supreme Court. So I think this is an extraordinary development. So what I would expect also as a climate lawyer and as a climate scholar would be a decision that is in line with the advancement of climate jurisprudence in the world. So despite the transversal nature of climate law, it also has, as we all know, very important specificities. So what I'm expecting as an outcome, as a concrete and specific outcome from this case, is that the Supreme Court really frames the case in terms of climate law and climate legal concepts and climate science, as opposed to based in more general environmental law concepts with which they might be more familiar. So this is something that I would expect. Third thing that I would expect as an outcome would be the recognition as a right to a healthy climate, as a corollary of the right to a healthy environment. Because Andreas mentioned that you have a provision and paragraph 112 of the Norwegian constitution. We have something similar in Article 225 of the Brazilian constitution, which sets forth that the right to a healthy environment. And what I would expect the court to do is to expressly consider climate change as an important part of this equation. I would also expect, and maybe this actually goes beyond the more immediate scope of the case. I would expect that the Supreme Court reaps this opportunity to advance climate law in Brazil and to strengthen this corpus of climate jurisprudence, that so that we Brazilians can also offer our contribution to the development of other cases around the globe. And finally, and this is not a legal outcome, but I think it's as important. I think this case is going to be particularly important to send a positive signal to the world and to the markets, in the sense that Brazil, with its immense share of natural resources, can be a major protagonist of the post-pandemic green reset, and which would help us both reposition ourselves in the multilateral and geopolitical arenas, and ultimately do our part in helping the world build back better. Let's see how we're doing on time. So as I mentioned when we were chatting before the session, we have, as of last Thursday, another case that was brought before the Supreme Court, also by political parties, and with the participation of several NGOs and several entities such as Greenpeace. A case which has a broader scope than the climate fund case, in the sense that it aims at compelling the government to lower deforestation according to what's set forth in PPC-DAM, which is a plan for prevention and control of deforestation in the Amazon, which was created back in 2004. So this is also also an interesting development in climate litigation in Brazil, and this is something that definitely to watch for. Overall, I would say the significance of these cases in Brazil, it lies mainly in the fact that they are a harbinger of a new chapter in climate litigation in Brazil. Especially, and I think this holds especially true in the current geopolitical environment, where we're witnessing a rise of populisms and reflux of globalization, so to speak. So, and I also think that we're going to see a rise in domestic climate litigation in the absence of an international venue to adjudicate climate claims or environmental claims, for that matter. So just quickly, what I see, of course, I'm not going to address all of them, but a few topics that I believe are trends to be followed in climate litigation in Brazil. The first thing, I think we're going to have cases that are science strong, in terms that the underlying science is tailored to fit the the emissions profile that we want to tackle. So basically, I think in the global South, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just purely try to apply attribution science to an emissions profile that's more heavy on land use and deforestation, for instance. So I think another thing I think we're going to see in the near future is the strategic use of litigation to in a way decode attribution science in terms of legal concepts that have been around for a while in each jurisdiction. In Brazil, this would be the nexus of causality, which is a general concept of environmental law. All judges are familiar with, and I think it's up to us climate litigators and climate scientists to try and make this understandable for judges. Another thing, I think it's going to be a trend, because sometimes when we think of climate science, we tend to forget about the underlying economics, and I think we need to bring economists into the fold. Brazil, for instance, is highly dependent on a steady influx of foreign investment. So we need to put together reports that quantify the adverse economic impacts of climate inaction. So I think this is something that we're definitely going to see more. Another trend that I see, and this has to do with what Andreas pointed out with regard to Norway's emission, I think we're going to see a rise in litigation trying to tackle the outsourcing of emissions. That is, going after companies that are cleaner in their countries of origin, but outsource their emissions to other countries. I still have a couple of things to mention, but I think what's more important is I think we're gonna see a rise in claims against private entities and corporations in Brazil, because most of what we have right now target the government. So I think we're gonna see a rise of claims against not only carbon majors, but also financial institutions, development banks, and I think we're going after the whole value chain. And we're going to expand the focus of litigation with possible ramifications abroad. So I think we have a quite interesting chance of seeing some transnational litigation developments. And I see I already spoke for 15 minutes. I'm out of time, and but I think that's basically what I wanted to convey today. If you have any questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. That was so so interesting, and it's really heartening to learn about that role that climate litigation is really starting to play in influencing policy. And yeah, really, really interesting. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts there and your knowledge. So I'll just move on then to our final speaker, and so we're speaking with now. We'll give the floor to Richard Harvey, who's Senior Legal Counsel with Greenpeace. He's also a human rights lawyer, and he has been one of the key lawyers in the Norwegian People versus Arctic Oil case, which Andreas just gave us an overview of it from the start. So Richard, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Helena, and thank you all for inviting us to participate in this. I think it's a very timely coming together. I mean, we were virtually in the Oslo Supreme Court last week. We're virtually in the Supreme Court in Brazil this week. And there is virtue in what we're doing. Well, I know Flora Lynch has asked, do you guys think the governments have taken the climate crisis more seriously now we're taking them to court? Absolutely, definitely. Are they doing enough as a result of it? Absolutely, definitely not. But one of the major problems that we are dealing with is that governments are only responsive if they are put under pressure. We have seen that the Norwegian example was an absolute classic. They were the first developed country to ratify the Paris Agreement in June 2016. Hooray for Norway! And in June 2016, that very same month, they issued more licenses further north and further east than ever before for drilling for oil that we cannot afford to burn. We've already got more oil and gas discoveries and resources that are known that it makes absolutely no sense to go looking for the unknown. It's purely a matter of greed. So these lawsuits are a very helpful way of pointing to where governments are failing desperately in their duty. And the wave of climate litigation that started really in 2015 with the Urgenda case in the Netherlands has been growing, and it is now a tidal wave as far as these governments and corporations are concerned. The Ligari case in Pakistan, not so well known, but absolutely earth-shaking for the constitutional setup in Pakistan, where a judge summons every single government minister, says, get your ass in my, come to my courtroom, on pain of being held in contempt of court, and explain what it is your ministry is doing to meet its obligations to reduce fossil fuel emissions. And that's an enormously powerful challenge to governments. And what governments, of course, hate is that they actually get dragged into court and that they fight us on our very right to assert rights. And this, again, in Norway was absolutely staggering. You had the state's attorney, the Attorney General of Norway, saying, well, I know it's a right it says it's a right in the first paragraph of Article 112. And by the way, yes, it is right that Article 112 has only recently been placed in the newly created human rights section of the Constitution, but it's not a right. It's just a matter of principle towards which governments should strive. But individuals have no right to come into court and demand that right. Well, we didn't get too much out of the first judge we appeared in front of in the district court, but we got that. He understood that a right is a right. When we went to the to the Court of Appeals, they said again, yes, of course, a right is a right. And also, they stood by our claim that the exporting, and that Andreas showed you that wonderful graph, the tiny little amount of oil and gas that are burned in Norway itself, and the huge quantity that is burned as a result of their exporting it abroad. So outsourcing their emissions so that somebody else has to pay for it. Oh, the Paris Agreement doesn't say that you have to take any responsibility for that. Well, of course, there are drug laws around the world, and I suppose it would be fair to say that a country can produce as much opium as it likes and export as much as any other country wants to buy, but yet governments don't allow that. They won't allow you to get away with exporting poisonous, dangerous drugs, and so. But apparently, the greenhouse gas emissions that will actually destroy the ability of humans to live on this planet, that's not nearly so much of a concern. Okay, I'm getting a bit polemical, but you get my point. It is farcical for a government representative to stand up and say that a right isn't a right. At the same time, as we are arguing rights, we're arguing constitutional provisions. And for lawyers in countries that are fortunate to have constitutions which recognize the right to a clean and healthy environment, and that's the overwhelming majority of states. By my accent, you'll hear I come from a country that doesn't have a written constitution, but Ireland has done a lot better than we have in that respect. The use of the constitutional power is an extremely strong one, and it's a very important way to get people to demand the fulfillment of their rights. But there's also procedural law, which is usually, if you're not a lawyer, the rather boring end of a lawsuit. Did the government follow the correct procedure? Well, it actually got particularly interesting in Norway because the government actually hid from the parliament the economic evidence that the oil that they were allowing to be drilled was actually not going to be profitable, or there was a serious risk that this wasn't even going to bring the economic benefits that they had always been claiming for it. And they had to admit in court last week that they had concealed emails from their own ministry officials, which had urged them to keep quiet and not to tell Norway's parliament and not to tell the people about the potential bad news of drilling for even more oil. And that, I think most people find pretty damn shocking when the government actually hides the truth from the people, particularly when you do have a constitutional right. In the second paragraph of Article 112, the people have the right to information about any encroachment on nature that is planned or carried out. And so they were hiding the effect of that. And human rights, I just want to finish because we want to give people time to come in. Human rights and the human right to a clean, safe, healthy environment are more and more being recognized as fundamental. Because what is the right to life if you can't breathe? What is the right to health if it's going to be sabotaged by what your government is doing to you? And so at the UN level, I started studying law when the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights had just been laid open for signature. And my colleagues at the university said, why the hell are we bothering to study this stuff? There's never going to be any international law of any importance. Well, yeah, I've worked on the tribunals on Yugoslavia and Rwanda. International law has these days a hell of a lot more bite than anybody ever imagined it was going to have. And I think we have right now the opportunity to make international law work in the service of the people and to protect the human right to the very life that is sustained by a clean and healthy environment. So I'll stop there and give everybody a chance to weigh in.
Apologies. Thank you very much for sharing your views, of the perspectives on the case, and on the really the importance of having rights which actually can be litigated and enforced. I mean, otherwise, like I suppose you pointed out, what's the point of having it in your constitution if it it can't be relied on to vindicate that right to life? So it's thank you very much for sharing your views there. I suppose if I might see if we move on to maybe questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alina. So firstly, fantastic to hear from you all tonight. Thanks so much for your contributions. And thanks, Richard, for making my job a little bit easier and already answering one of the questions that was asked. So I wanted to ask then, we have Sinead has asked, what more can the public do to raise awareness of these cases, for example, signing petitions and that kind of thing? And I just wanted to add to that myself, maybe firstly to direct it towards Alessandra, in the context of Brazil, with how difficult is it with the political context to engage with the public and to be raising awareness of the cases, and what can people do in such circumstances?
I think it's not all that hard to engage the public with regard to environmental questions right now. Just a couple of weeks ago, really, this poll, this poll of the Confederation, National Confederation of the Industries, show that 98% of respondents are worried about an environmental issues at large and the climate crisis. So that shows that awareness regarding environmental issues in Brazil has been on the rise. And specifically answering the question of what more can be done, I think NGOs and even corporations have been teaming up to trying to raise awareness and engaging on advocacy campaigns, in the sense that even if we want to thrive economically, we need to stop. We need to get our climate game up and stop deforesting the Amazon. So this is to me quite clear. And also in terms of legal instruments, not everything has to go through court. One of the remedies that I think might be quite effective, at least in terms of getting the parties to acknowledge the problem and do something about it, is OECD claims, which is something that has been done against BP in England by Client Earth. And I think we have, several cases regarding climate that have already generating complaints before the OECD. So this is an interesting alternative I see as well, besides taking the matters to court as well.
Okay, thanks for that. We have another question here from Johanna asking about have any of the panelists attempted to use international investment law against foreign companies or domestic companies who use this abroad? And any reflections or opportunities or challenges about using this field? And before anyone, if anyone has an answer to that, just to flag that in 2 weeks' time, we'll be having another webinar similar to this one about corporate climate litigation. So there might be, that might be useful for Johanna there if you know, if you're interested in corporate climate litigation. But just to ask, do any of the panelists have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm interested in that too. Make sure you invite me to watch. But if I may just jump in very quickly, I think, yes, I think that's, I haven't done so personally yet, but I think that's a trend. If we consider, for instance, the O'Donnell case in Australia, it was slightly different because they're actually challenging Australian government, the performance of Australian government, governmental bonds based on their climate inaction. But yes, I think the investor-based approach is something that is going to gain traction too.
Great.
I can just jump in on that. Both in Canada and in Luxembourg, Greenpeace is pursuing pension fund investments as one way of ensuring that your pensions, if you're lucky enough to have one, are not being used to bolster the coffers of the polluting companies and the greenhouse gas emitting companies. So it's a highly technical but a highly important area to get involved in. And also when Johanna raises the question about foreign companies whose activities are devastating to the environment, there are obviously not just greenhouse gas emissions issues, but you've got the horrendous mining company violations of rights, and in Brazil in particular, I'm thinking of where the Brumadinho case is a horrific example of how a company can get away with killing and maiming and paying a pittance, if anything at all, to the families whose lives have been destroyed, because it's just a business cost to them. So increasingly those companies who have headquarters in North America or in European capitals are being sued on their home turf for substantially more serious damage liabilities than they would face in the country where they caused the actual damage.
Yeah. But I don't know if you heard, but the claim against BHP and the UK was just dismissed last week. So regarding the Brumadinho and Mariana, so that was sad to see.
Okay, thanks for that. We might squeeze in one quick final question for Andreas, if that's okay, before we finish up. So just to ask your experience of using more maybe unconventional tactics such as the cake that you mentioned, and civil disobedience aspect. What has your experience been with that kind of thing? Does it really help raise awareness of your work? Does it help engage the public? And have you any thoughts on that to share?
So I think that the combination works really well of doing sort of both action, mobilizing, like we arranged the school strikes in Norway, and sort of steered them in a direction to be more concrete and anti-oil, combining that with the court case and with political work, I think, and participating in formal processes we do as well, like hearings. That works really well, and So something like the Lofoten case is a good example. There were a lot of years of sort of just mobilizing of well, we became friends with the fishermen up there, and working politically, talking to the small parties who were against it, and made them sort of stand up against it. And then at one point they actually opened up and they sent one oil rig to the area, and our organization stopped that oil rig with the boats. And meanwhile, we filed a complaint, and before they could tow away our boat, the complaint was, well, we won the complaint. So that's a case where really all of these things are coming together. And in the lawsuit now, we're really feeling that we've been given a unique chance to talk about this. And I think that even if we don't win the case, we've still won a lot, because there's finally been a debate about oil and climate. And for a long time, Norway has had a really good climate debate. We've talked a lot about, everyone's agreed that climate is really important, but then oil has sort of been seen as just a completely separate thing. And I think that we've managed to link those up in people's minds. And I think that the lawsuit has played a key part in that.
Great. Okay, thank you. Just before I pass back to Helena, because we're just coming up on time now, Richard, I see you have your hand raised. Did you want to come in on that?
Can I just add that at the conclusion of our case in Norway, our counsel uttered these words, and I thought they were so powerful. I urge you to reach a judgment that your children and grandchildren will be proud of. Gets me right there. And that's what it really is, what it's all about. It is about the future generations, not people of my generation. It's about the future. And watch out, in a couple of weeks, you will see the Swiss climate senior women going to court, going to the European Court of Human Rights to file their challenge to their own government's complete failure to protect them. And the government callously saying to them, come back in 2040 when it reaches 2 degrees, and then we can talk about it.
That was unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much for those contributions and for answering those questions. And I'll pass back over to Helena now to wrap it up.
Well, yeah, just thanks, Emer, for jumping in there. And thank you all to really, would suppose to thank the speakers once again for their fantastic contributions, for sharing their knowledge and insights, and having this really interesting, I suppose, meeting of minds across in different countries. And it's just I think it's helped to illustrate the fact that climate litigation is really, it's an international movement, and it's going to continue to play such an important role in hopefully safeguarding those important rights for future generations, as Richard just put it. So thanks again to the speakers, and we will be holding another webinar actually in a couple of weeks' time. So we will be updating, sending around updates on social media about that. And thanks as well to our participants for their questions and for their attendance. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again
for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Just
Bye, everyone.
if there